right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's episode of You Ask, We Answers, where we stands for Women Engaged, and we are answering your pressing social justice issues. We're going to get started in just a moment. In the meantime, let us know where you're tuning in from in the chat. All right. Looking good. So once again, thank you so much everyone for joining our episode today. I'm Mashara Davis, and I'm our Vice President of Political and Civic Engagement here at Women Engaged. We appreciate all of our returning viewers for coming to check out our show, and thank you to our new viewers for taking time out of your day to come and learn more about Women Engaged and the issues that we work on. Women Engaged is a social justice nonpartisan initiative, and we work at the intersections of reproductive justice and integrated voter engagement. Today, we're talking all about redistricting. We're so excited to have an expert here with us. And before we jump into today's discussion, I first want to just recognize that the month of May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So thank you so much to all of the AAPI organizations here in Georgia and across the country, making sure that our AAPI brothers and sisters have a voice in our democracy. So thank you. Now we're going to go ahead and jump in, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Karuna Ramachandran, who is an expert in the field of redistricting. She's worked alongside coalition partners to move Georgia towards fair and equitable redistricting. Her coalition works includes 2020 census, civic engagement, and community-based public health. Prior to joining Advancing Justice Atlanta, Karuna directed community-based public health programs aimed to reduce health disparities of Georgia's rapidly growing AAN, HPI, and refugee communities. I'm so excited to turn the microphone over to Karuna to talk about redistricting and to really demystify the process and how folks can get involved.
Thanks so much, Mashara. That was a very kind welcome. And I like to tell people I'm not the expert, but our coalition members are our experts, and I'm the lucky one that gets to work with them. Yeah, and I'm so happy to be with y'all today. I'm a big fan of Women Engaged, all of y'all who work with Women Engaged and the work that you do as well. So thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here. And of course, I'm excited to talk about redistricting because this is the next big fight. And for us with the Georgia Redistricting Alliance, it's really important for us that as many Georgians, especially Georgians of color, get involved in this fight in whatever way that they can. So I'm really excited to kind of dig in today. So I'm going to share my screen.
Perfect.
And how's that look?
That looks great.
Okay, great. So the Georgia Redistricting Alliance is part of the Pro-Georgia C3 state table. We have a number of members. We actually have 17 members on our coalition. We started doing this work back in 2017, which is in between redistricting cycles. But the reason is because we thought that, it was really important to begin to build power towards the 2020 cycle, which we're in now. The other reason is because our legislature also has a pattern of doing redistricting work in between cycles. And so there was a number of issues that came up with redistricting back in 2017 and 2019 as well, where our members and Pro-Georgia members took action and stood up against that. And we said, this coalition, the work group really took form out of that activity. For us at GRA, it's redistricting is really about investing in long-term power building. We talk about a lot of the times when we think about redistricting and talk about it, it's in terms of the voter suppression part of it. And that is really critical and important that we think about that part of it too. But first and foremost, we as people of color have to think about it as the power building opportunity that it is, and put ourselves squarely in the center of that and make sure that we play a role. So what is redistricting? Just give a quick overview for folks that about what it is. So redistricting is basically the process used by governments at multiple levels of government to redraw political district boundaries. So think about when you go to vote, you have your ballot and you have all the different elected officials on your ballot that you can vote for. Each of those elected officials are, when they're elected into office, would represent a district, right? A political boundary. And those districts are comprised of people. Georgians live in those districts, and those are the people that elected officials are supposed to stand up for, right? Fight for, make sure that their issues are being heard. Populations change. We have people move across the state, people move in and out of the state, right? We know that here in Georgia, a lot of our communities are moving outside of the metro Atlanta area and going all around the state. And that happens all over the country. So that's why we do the census every 10 years, the decennial census, so that we can understand population shifts all over the country. So the 2020 census just released apportionment data. That just tells us like the whole number of people who live in Georgia. And then in August or September, we should get some detailed information about who lives here. So, who lives here, where do they live, what are their characteristics, race, ethnicity, etc. So we will get all of that information from the census data. And so what the Georgia legislature is going to do is use that information to redraw political district lines so that we have, as equal as possible populations within each of the districts. And the reason for that is that, it's constitutionally required, right? And the reason is because of the principles within the Constitution of one person, one vote, is that each of us individually should have equal or as close to equal representation from elected officials as possible. So one way to do that is to make sure that our districts have as equal population as possible. So when we think about it, redistricting at its core is a good thing. And it happens at all levels. We have, congressional redistricting, state legislative redistricting, so all the districts from our state legislators, those lines will get moved around as well. School boards, city councils, county commission, all levels will adjust so that people can have equal representation. That's the goal. That's at the core of it. But, I don't have to make a case to you all to say that principle of equal representation isn't always upheld within our state or across the country, and that voter suppression is real. And so while we think about redistricting as a power building opportunity, we also have to think about it as an opportunity for people who don't want us to have power, to take that power away from us. So we have to think about those things as well. See if I can move my slide.
And actually, Karuna, thank you so much for, for lifting up the importance of power building. What are some strategies you think folks can, put into play to make sure that we're building power within Black and Brown communities?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to understand how the process works in order to get in there and interrupt it, right? Because if we don't know how the process works, then it will happen around us without us even knowing, and it will impact us greatly. Based on, redistricting can really impact who gets elected into office. And who gets elected into office impacts whether or not we have the representation that we deserve. Are our elected officials fighting for our reproductive rights? Are they fighting for our, voting rights? Are they concerned about our daily lives? Do they even want to get to know who we are? right, as their constituents. And so first and foremost, we have to know how the process works. And then we can, once we understand a little bit about how the process works, we have to think about, well, what level of government are we interested in, getting engaged with? Um, like I mentioned before, redistricting happens at all different levels: state legislative, county, school board. Um, you know, at every point where redistricting is happening, the public should have an opportunity to be engaged and involved in that process, to have an opinion on how the district lines are being drawn. And that's not always the case here in Georgia. There is historically, with our state legislature, a sort of veil of secrecy around the redistricting process. And so what GRA members and other partners have been really fighting for is to have more transparency with the redistricting process. So for example, like I mentioned before, the census data will come out in August, and then it's rumored that we would have special session this year. So the governor would call a special session. The Georgia General Assembly comes back together. The redistrict, we have two committees in our state legislature that work on redistricting. We have a House committee and a Senate committee. And those committees would be looking at the proposed maps and pushing those through pretty much in the same way that you push through a bill. It's basically like a bill, and it has to get voted on by the Georgia General Assembly. Now, what maps are they proposing? What do those maps look like? What are the impacts of the district lines that they've redrawn? We don't know. But as Georgians, we should know. We should be given an opportunity to view those maps and have an opportunity to give our input. So, in addition to kind of understanding how redistricting works, another way that people can really get involved is to demand that kind of transparency from your representative or your senator at the state level, and ask them to give you that information. And if they don't know, right, it's really incumbent on them to find that information out. Because to the extent possible that our communities can be involved, they can't be involved unless we know what's happening and we have time to get them engaged, right? Mm-hmm. But that's another way that people can get involved. One of the things historically that's happened in Georgia is that our legislature loves to try to do redistricting in between cycles. And so I'll just share a quick example that I love to use. This was, I believe it was back in 2017. This is House District 111. And so the incumbent, the sitting representative there was Brian Strickland. And so what the attempt here was to protect the incumbent, right? To protect his seat. So what does that mean? That means that, in Strickland's district, there were population changes or some shifts. And so then when they were doing the analysis, he didn't quite feel confident that the people in that district, as it was drawn, would vote for him, right? So to protect his incumbency, to protect his seat, they were proposing to, and you'll see the green part, the red parts here, they were proposing to take those voters of color and cut them out of the district. And then in the green part, you can see they were proposing to take those white voters and move them in, right? So literally, this is what we're talking about when we say gerrymandering. Manipulating the lines, manipulating the people who is in your district. Because if this were to pass, it didn't, by the way, because of public pressure. If this were to pass, then that representative was choosing to stay in office. The voters weren't choosing to keep him in office. He was choosing to stay in office. And the General Assembly was making that choice for the voters on behalf of them. And so when we're thinking about gerrymandering and understanding how to get in there and interrupt the process, it's important for folks to think about, what level of government are you interested in? Are you interested in looking at school boards? That's great. You're interested in education and the level of education that your children are getting. Are you interested in city council because you have, some concerns about some of the votes that your council members have been making, commissioner, some of the decisions that the commissions make, tax issues, land use issues, all kinds of things that the commissioners do. Think about what are the issues that matter to you, and then really look at your district, right? What district are you in? Who represents you? And get with your community to start to think about, what are some of the changes that you want to see for your community? That then puts you in a position to, when they do propose maps like this, you can come back and say, well, wait a minute, we've been having conversations about our community and our district. And when you cut out voters like that, it will impact us. And that puts you in a position where you can be part of the conversation.
Yeah, so really redistricting touches every aspect of our lives, right? And you're saying that we need to demand transparency from our representatives and understand how the process works. And so as we talk about the process, I heard you mention special session. Can you lift up what that looks like and how the community can get involved?
Yeah, well, I will say this, the we don't know. We don't know a lot about the special session. And what I want folks who are listening in to really grasp is how terrible that is, right? A lot of folks who are listening in have experienced what, the extreme sort of leaving out of our communities that we had in this last legislative session, right? We had COVID, there were restrictions in terms of who could come to the Capitol and testify or advocate with their legislators. And that's understandable. But that was also used as an excuse to move laws and move legislation through committees without allowing space and time for our communities to come in and give their input. And we experienced that many times this past legislative session, right? We saw that with the law that actually did get passed, the voter suppression law that did get passed in, where, just 48 hours before it got pushed through committee was when people even heard of it to begin with, right? So that's the level of transparency and inclusion that we just experienced. So now when we think about the special session, we don't know when it is. It's been rumored to start in November. The Speaker of the House has said that he wouldn't expect it to start before there's frost on the pumpkin. So that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable information. We need more details. We need them to tell us when they're having a special session. Will there be draft maps that our community can view? Will they have public hearings, right? And where are they going to have public hearings? They should be having them all across the state. Absolutely. So those are things that everybody who's listening in today, you can get on the phone right now to your representative and demand for these kinds of, answers, right? And really advocate to them and educate your legislators that actually we want to know, we want to be involved, right? If you will only tell us.
Yes.
So that's kind of the, situation we're in with the special session.
Yes. Well, you heard it here first from Karuna herself. Hop on the phone with your legislators and let them know that you want to be involved in this process.
I could go into detail here, and I'm sure some folks have seen some of these things about gerrymandering and what we're looking at. But the overall gist is that, why is it so important that we see these draft maps before they, push them out into the special session and start voting on them? Why should we look at them? Well, we want to make sure that they're not doing some of these things, packing and cracking, right? So if you look at this example, right, on the one side, the first column, I'm not sure which side it is for y'all when you're looking at it, but it's on my left, the first column. You see, you have 50 people, you have 60 blue, you have 40 red, right? So the majority is blue. So if you move on to the second column, that's an example of how lines can be drawn with perfect representation. You have 3 districts where, the blues have had an opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. And you have 2 districts where the reds have had an opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. So that's a pretty good example of good representation. But when we look at how lines can be messed with in gerrymandering, you have the example number 2, where you're actually you're making really compact districts, but it's not fair because you're actually creating 5 districts for the blues and 0 districts for the reds. That means the reds never had any opportunity, a real opportunity to elect a candidate of choice, right? And then you have the third example here of gerrymandering, where it's neither compact nor fair. You're basically breaking up all the blues, right? And cracking them into different districts. So then you are flipping it where the reds have a majority and the blues don't have a majority. So it's not reflective of the population, right? And so ultimately we want to make sure that the maps that are proposed in our legislature are reflective of our population and that they allow our communities ample opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. So that's what we're talking about with gerrymandering. And that's why we need to know more information about the proposed maps from the Georgia legislature.
Yes. And a question for you, Karuna, gerrymandering really is a form of voter suppression, right? And so this will be the first time in Georgia where we don't have the protection of the Voter Rights Act when we're doing redistricting, which required the preclearance of states with a history of voter suppression to have, approval from the federal government. So can you talk about what that process, what is that going to look like in Georgia and what's the landscape there?
Yeah. This will be the first time that we're doing redistricting in many, many years without the protections of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that required preclearance, like you said. And so what that means is that, Georgia will not be required at this point because there's no federal law requiring that these proposed maps at any level are presented to the Department of Justice to sort of check them to make sure that they're not wildly gerrymandered, racial gerrymanders or partisan gerrymanders that disenfranchise, right, Georgians across the state. So we don't have that sort of baked in process that our legislature would have to follow. So what that means is, and this, goes into why we should get involved in redistricting. What that means is that we actually have to be that. We have to be the eyes and ears, right, to prevent and weaken the attempts for gerrymandering. We have to get in there and advocate for our communities and try to slow down this process where potentially the legislature is going to push through maps that could really disenfranchise, our voters. So when we think about the maps that you just saw on the previous slide, for example, number 3, even though the blues are in the majority, the way that the lines are cut, they could never actually elect a candidate of choice in only but 2 districts, right? So that's not fair, and that's not reflective of the population. And so when we're talking about disenfranchising voters, we're actually talking about affecting their ability to elect a candidate of choice. So even if you go vote, does your vote have the strength and the power that it should to make sure that that person you want in office is in office, the person who is going to fight for you, fight for your community, the person who's actually going to stand with you with the issues that matter for you, right? It actually weakens your opportunity to vote. So even if we vote with gerrymandering, we have serious voter suppression issues. So like I said, we have to be proactively involved. We have to start having conversations about, what where our communities are. A lot of redistricting process relies on the census data. But I can't stress this enough that we have, as communities and communities of color, and also as immigrant communities all over the state, have so much data about our communities that is not available via the census, right? Sometimes we know more about where our communities are. We obviously know more about our issues. We have the local information about the history of the issues and the problems in our communities, right? All of those things can be used when we're advocating for our communities to have fair redistricting, to have fair maps. So it's really, really important that we get involved because we don't have those protections. And we talked a little bit about, how people can get involved. And here are just some more specific examples. We talked about, demanding transparency from your state representative or senator, but you can also do that at any level of government: commissioner, school board, city council, any level. You have a right to know, and you can push for that. We talked about just arming yourself with information. Know what your districts are and do a little research on your districts and who represents you. And, talk with your community about it, right? Talk about in your communities, especially locally, right? Like, where are y'all interested in seeing change happen? And then do some more research at that level of government, right? You can, like I said, pressure, and ask your representatives at that level of government for more information. You can also research it to see and keep an ear out. A lot of times some of these hearings will be pushed out in like the legal organ of the city, or, they'll be posted on the city website. So y'all can look out for that and keep an eye out for that and make sure and plan to be there at those events. A really, really important one is that anybody can work together in community to develop testimony about what kind of changes you want to see, right? Developing testimony about your community is a really, really powerful opportunity to put yourself in the center of the redistricting fight, because this is what redistricting is all about. It's all about representation. Representation for what? What are those common issues or concerns, right? What's your shared geography? Where do you actually live in this community? And that data that we talked about, that history, that information about the community that you all have, putting that information together in a testimony is a really, really powerful way to get involved. So that if there are public hearings that the legislature has, then y'all are ready to go share your testimony. But the other thing is that the Georgia Redistricting Alliance will be planning some people's hearings over the summer. So that's another opportunity for people to come and share their testimonies at people's hearings. So, we definitely encourage folks to, go to our website and sign up to take action, or feel free to email me directly to get involved, or just that way we can share information with y'all about those events that we'll be holding across the state. And then, the other thing I'll share is just, there's so much resources and materials, and we just talked a little bit about redistricting, just like the high level parts, but there's so much more that you can read into. So I've included some links here that have just a ton of resources for folks.
Thank you, Karuna. And if we can leave this slide up for a few moments so folks can take down that information. And just another question for you, redistricting is such a hotly contested topic, right? And so can you talk a little bit about it just being a C3 issue and a nonpartisan issue?
Yeah. I mean, so at the core of it, we talked about that the core of it is to maintain representation. The principle of it is one person, one vote. So, gerrymandering makes redistricting about partisanship, Democrats versus Republicans and securing seats and flipping seats and things like that. That's actually not what it's supposed to be about. It's really supposed to be just about us having the representation that we deserve. So we tell people all the time, this is squarely a C3 nonpartisan activity. And one of the things that we advocate for with the Georgia Redistricting Alliance is that redistricting should be nonpartisan. We should take partisanship out of it. And like the example that we shared in District 111, that happened a few years ago, is that we shouldn't be conducting redistricting in a way that is to protect people who are already elected into office. That's not the purpose. We should be protecting the voters, the Georgians, right? And when we do that, it could mean that our districts become more competitive, right? And that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, we want elected officials to work for our vote.
Yes.
If you want me to vote for you, you need to get to know me, and I need to know that you're going to stand up for my community in real ways. That's really what we want to see. That's where we want to move redistricting in Georgia. But unfortunately here, both Republicans and Democrats, both parties have participated in gerrymandering. And so we have a long way to go to push our state to that. But I think that the more that communities of color and disenfranchised communities are part of this process, then the more we can push towards equity and transparency in redistricting.
Yes, it's all about building political power. So we have a question about, with this being a nonpartisan issue, how can civic engagement organizations develop messaging around redistricting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, I think a lot of civic engagement organizations do like integrated voter engagement work where you're talking about the issues already, right? And I think that that's just a perfect area to bring in redistricting, because all it is then having another layer to that conversation of, okay, these are the issues that matter to you. And so that's what's going to drive you to vote, right? So these are the issues that also can help us hold our elected officials accountable. Having that accountability conversation is very much a civic engagement, nonpartisan conversation, right? Because voters need to know what they're voting for when they check off that box on the ballot. So I think developing messaging that's in line with the issues that matter to your community that you've already been working with is really, really important. And if there are particular issues, is that, are they concerned, about having these issues being heard in the community? Are they being addressed adequately? Right. And giving folks an opportunity to have some conversations about that. And I think that would really help people develop some of this testimony that we're talking about, right? Because if we're seeing that our issues, voters' issues, and other community members who are not voters, if their issues are not being addressed, then we should be developing testimony to talk about that and lift it up in a public forum.
Thank you, Karuna. And there's another question for you. before we shift to the latter part of our show is around the idea of creating a redistricting committee. The question is, in order to protect voters, there's a discussion of creating a redistricting committee or commission. Can you talk a little bit about that and share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, the idea behind redistricting commissions is that the process is nonpartisan and it's independent from current elected officials. And so at the heart of it, it's a really good idea to have an independent commission. And some of the legislation that we saw with the past session was even to have some citizens be on, independent commissions. And I think that at the heart of it is a really good idea, right? To have citizens deciding their districts as opposed to elected officials who are very biased. I think that, you know, we have a long way to go in Georgia and with our Georgia legislature to have independent actions, from any kind of commission or committee, right? And so I think that we have to be cautious and state that anything that's formed here in Georgia is not inherently partisan in nature because one party or the other is sort of controlling it anyways. So I think that's a concern that some of us have when we promote, independent commissions. We have to also think about where are we at as a state? Are we there yet? And if we do move towards an independent commission, can it be truly independent? And that's what we need to fight for.
Well, thank you so much. We have so many comments in the chat saying wonderful event. We hope that this is recorded so that way it can be shared with folks and they can go back and listen to all of the just juicy information that you shared. And so I want to just reiterate, you mentioned for folks to get involved, demanding transparency from their representatives, from their senators, advocating for their community and talking with their neighbors and developing testimonies for public hearings. You also highlighted knowing your rights and knowing the process of doing some research and knowing who represents you. And because this is a nonpartisan issue, there are so many civic engagement organizations that are working on redistricting, like the Georgia Redistricting Alliance, that people can go to and learn more information from. Mm-hmm. So this is awesome. Thank you. So, question for you, Karuna. In your experience over the past year, what's something that has resonated with you that you think folks should know?
With regard to redistricting or in general?
Let's say both.
Okay. Well, when I started this work with redistricting, I always felt that it was the people that should be at the heart of it. And it's any kind of case that we make, even litigation and things like that. What's at the heart of it? It's people and it's our stories. And I think that's over the past year that has really, really driven home for me is that you can have demographers, you can have lawyers, you can have experts, you can have policy wonks, right? But at the heart of it, if we don't have local Georgians fighting for fair redistricting with their stories, it doesn't really amount to much. We need people to get involved, and we're the most valuable part of this puzzle. We really are. And so I think that's really, really driven home for me over the past year. And then I think on a personal note, it's just been a lot going on over the past year, of course, in so many different ways. And so I think like that pressure to feel like we have to do something, we have to act now. I think it's real, but on a personal note, and also part of what we're doing with GRA is that we're trying to see this as a marathon and not a race. Is that there's some things that we can get done this year And I think it'll be really, really great. And there's some things that we are not going to get done this year, and that's fine because we are working to build power from now to 2030. So it's also about taking care of ourselves, doing that self-care, taking rest, taking breaks, not pressuring ourselves too much, but just doing what we can and where we can.
Yes, and building power takes time through sustained engagement. And you mentioned something, we're the most valuable piece of the puzzle, and that just really resonated with me. And so just thinking about, those who are creating the narrative are from community, right? And that's what's important. And so as we wind down, I know you mentioned self-care. I would love to just hear how you practice self-care just to make sure that you're not, burning yourself out, which is so common, right? In this work, we take it home with us and we're working from home due to the pandemic. So what is something that brings you joy?
Well, what I've noticed recently is that, nature, being with my family are two things that really bring me joy, but sort of the anxiety and rush of everything prevent me from, experiencing it. So one of the things I've been doing for my own self-care, I've been focusing a lot on my own breath and just taking really deep breaths and taking big exhales and letting out all the anxiety and stress, just creating space within my mind and heart to kind of appreciate these things that are already around me. So I've been working on that.
Yes, I love it. Self-care is so important. And, it's really how we bring our full selves to the work, right? And so I heard you mention nature. I personally love bike trails.
Yeah,
So any recommendations, let me know.
absolutely. I just started biking again after years and years, so maybe I will have some soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And another follow-up question, what are you looking forward to beyond this moment? This in like regards to redistricting and really just within this space of voter rights and how redistricting is impacting our rights.
I'm just looking forward to us owning the narrative, like people of color owning the narrative for this movement and this change in Georgia, and really squarely being at the center of it. And so that's just exciting to me. I think I didn't talk as much about my work with Asian Americans advancing justice, but I think part of that too is just making sure that we're having these conversations in so many different languages, right? Different Asian languages, Spanish, making sure that we're including our African immigrant communities as well, and making sure that when we see redistricting happening in state, we're seeing the diversity of Georgians here. I'm really excited about that. And that's not something that begins and ends this year. That's ongoing. And that's something that we'll continue to do and build.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned the piece around inclusivity. That's so important. When we talk about this work, ensuring that everyone and anyone who wants to be involved can be involved, right? Regardless of, language, regardless of race or gender or, being differently abled, right? Being able to participate and have a voice is so important. So thank you.
Yeah.
So, Corinne, is there anything that you'd like to share with folks before we close out today?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for the time and just like the beautiful energy that's being put on having these events and conversations with people. I mean, I feel grateful to have been part of it today. So I just want to say thank you to you and to everybody who's listening. And that I just look forward to, hearing from y'all.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Karuna. We certainly appreciate you being on our You Ask, We Answer series today. And we are very excited about this redistricting process. We know that it's a journey. And like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so folks can get involved, and we'll certainly be reaching out to the Georgia Redistricting Alliance and reaching out to you for your expertise and encouraging folks to get involved. So thank you so much for joining today. And we can't wait to have you back again. All right, so this closes out our episode today of You Ask, We Answers. Thank you all so much for joining today. And if you'd like to learn more, you can visit the Georgia Redistricting Alliance online, and you can also visit womenengage.org to learn more about our work. Thank you all so much for joining today, and we'll see you again next week on Thursday at 12 p.m. Have a good day, everybody.